Hey guys, welcome to my channel. So today we'll be discussing about uh, a scenario on Azure Data Factory implementation. So we'll be discussing one of the scenarios. So you may get a question in data engineering interviews where they will ask you the scenario, or you may encounter this during any of your project work. So I thought it was worth sharing. So I had to dig in or do some research on this, and you can find the link in the description box below where I did most of my research on. So there is a useful channel and a video which I refer to, and I'll try to explain what is the approach that we'll be following. So we'll first logically see what the problem statement is. We'll try to come up with the answer, and then we'll take a deeper dive into the solution. So it would be a practical or a demo session. So if you want to follow along with me, you are welcome to do that. For this, you would need an Azure portal, you would need Azure Data Factory, you would need a couple of files. So we'll discuss all that. So maybe what you can do is you can first watch this video, follow it, try to understand. And then if you have the resources, of if you know what the resources will be needed, you can maybe request in your organization if you are doing this as part of your company, or you can spin up those or you can spin up those things on your own if you have a private subscription. So with that said, let's get started. So we'll now go to my machine. I'll start sharing my screen, and we'll see what the problem statement is first, and then we will come up with the solution. So let me start sharing my screen. So what we have, consider a scenario where you have a bunch of files lying in ADLS, which is Azure Data Lake Storage. So you have a bunch of files lying in your Azure Data Lake Storage. It could be under a folder in a container, and you need to move the data from these files into Azure SQL DB. There would be a table inside Azure SQL DB. Now, for simplicity, we are we are we are considering the schemas of the file as well as the table same, but that's not the main point of the discussion. So the main point of the discussion is that we dynamically want to move data from selected columns out of all the available columns. So let's say your file has 12 columns, and your table also has 12 columns, as we have agreed on. So what we want to do is we want to only load data to first 5 columns. So, and how do we do that? So we basically want to have or design a pipeline which will only move the data from these 5 columns into the SQL table, Azure SQL table, and let's see how we can do it. And also, if there is a requirement, so to turn off the data movement for a particular column, let's say column 5, and if you want to turn on the movement of another column, let's say column 6, we should be able to do that. So it should be a metadata driven solution. So that is what we will be focusing on. So this is how it looks like. So I hope it makes sense. So we basically want to, in short, we basically want to move data from selected columns out of all the available columns when we transfer data. So in this case, it's a file table movement. So we will have a CSV file which we would use in order to move the data. But in other cases, you could have file to file transfer, you could have table to table transfer, but I think the logic would remain same. So for this, we would need some control tables. So let's straight away jump into the control tables. Now, as I said in the beginning, that there could be more than one file. So first of all, you should be able to loop those files uh, in an iterative manner, or uh, uh, in an iterative manner, so one file after the another. And then you should be able to pick up the columns which are needed in the data movement that should be done dynamically. So you have to first iterate through all the files, and then for a given file, you have to select the columns which you want to move the data from. So for this, what we have done is we have taken two tables. One is we are calling it as file mapping. So let me enlarge it. So I've already done the practical. So I've kept the script ready. So there is no major rocket science in this. What we have done is we have created. So first of all, I must tell you that it would be good if you control these controlled metadata tables into a schema, something like control. So we are calling it as cntl. So first you create the schema and then you create the tables. So we will create two tables. One is file mapping, in which there will be two main columns, which will define the mapping of the file versus the Azure SQL table inside Azure SQL DB. So these tables are already built. So again, if you want to see or if you want to download the script, I will. Okay, I think we are back. There was some technical issues. So I will send you the script, or you can create your own tables just for simplicity. Just try to keep it simple. So we don't want to really complicate it. So let's get back to what we were discussing though. So there would be a table which would store the mapping of file versus table. So in case of file to file transfer, this will contain uh, you can have the columns as source file name or target file name. If it is a table to table transfer, then you can name the columns as target file, source table name and target table name. But since in this case we will be doing file to table transfer, so we are giving it a name of source file name and a target table name. And another table, so we'll need, so this was at the file level. Now you need to dynamically pick up the columns from the files. So for that, we are creating this columns mapping table. Here you will have these five main attributes or columns. One would be the source file name, and the second one would be the source attribute name, which will store the column name. Then you would have target table name, and then target attribute name. And this is how the data looks like into it. And sorry, I forgot to mention one important column or attribute inside this metadata table column mapping, which is active. So this will control which columns we have to select, or which columns are qualified to move the data from. And if you go back to the example, so if we were to insert data metadata for this particular case, we would have we would insert all these 12 columns into the column mappings table, but we would only set the is active flag for first 5 columns. So I hope this makes sense. So again, just to summarize, we would need two tables, one at the file to table mapping level and the other one at the column mapping level. So this has already been done. So in just a while, I'll be showing you the files that we'll be using in order to move the data. So again, I am reiterating, or I'm re-emphasizing the fact that just keep it simple, especially if you have just started your journey on Azure Data Factory. And again, if you have some experience under your belt, then maybe you can go for some advanced features. So let's get back to the portal. So you would need access to the portal. So this is our portal. I have already logged in. This is my private uh, portal account. I'm not using my orgs account, which is obvious as well, because I just wanted to demonstrate it for for your benefit so that you can get something out of it. So let's see. So we have these two files. These are CSV files, simple files. And if you open this is how the data inside it looks like. So it's separated by a comma, as you can see, and it has a header row at the top. So you have, so it's a movie related data. So you have columns or attributes such as movie title, genres, year, rating, and Rotten Tomato. So Rotten Tomato is nothing but another way of, giving uh, rating to a particular movie. And in the second file, we have the same set of columns, but I believe we have added one more column. So again, it has the same columns, but this mass rating is something that we have added just to distinguish between these two files. I mean, there is no real, meaning behind it, but we have just added so that the files in terms of structure wise are a little different. So this is how the source files look like. And we have already created the tables in advance. So if you see here, we have created these two tables, DB1, DB2. Let me go back to the correct database. So you can see here, for file 1 corresponds to movies DB1 table. So here you have these columns, and file 2, which is movies DB2, corresponds to table movies DB2, and here you have additional column which we just saw, which has mass rating. And so this is how it looks like. Now let me see what is there in file mapping. So before we go over there, need to summarize what we have just discussed. There are two files. We should be the ADF pipeline that we are going to design should pick up each file at a time and then do the transfer. It could be a parallel transfer. It could be a sequential transfer. That really doesn't matter. That is not the main topic of this particular video. All we want is to see how we can dynamically control the movement of data from a selected columns out of the entire list of columns available to us. So we will be doing this. We'll be spinning up the ADF pipeline. And before we start spinning up the ADF pipeline or start designing the ADF pipeline, let's look at the data inside these two tables. So first, let's look at the data inside file mapping table. So we have two columns here, as I mentioned. One is source file name, the other one is target table name. Since there are two files only, so we have two rows here, and then so nothing major about it, only two rows. Now let's look at the rows or the content of the column mapping table. So here you have source file name, source attribute name, target table name, target attribute name. So in this case, both the source columns as well as the target column names are same, but in certain cases, it could be different. So we just have to see that. And you can see that is active flag is set to 1 for most of these columns. It's 0 for Rotten Tomato. So when we run the pipeline, we should not expect the Rotten Tomato column to have values in the database. And also for DB2, we should not expect the Rotten Tomato column in table movies DB2 to have a value. So this is what the expectation is, that when you transfer the data from these files to the table, let's see the content first. The Rotten Tomato column, which is having values like 67, 57, will be empty when you query the target table. Now that we have set the stage, I think it's time to dive into the exciting stuff of creating our pipeline. So we have already created the pipeline. Just in case if we get stuck, we can always refer to that. But for now, we will start from scratch. So for this, we would need two data sets. And those data sets should be parameterized because we would want to pick up the source file name as well as the target table name on the fly based on the entries based on the table that we have just created, the file mapping table. So let's first create the data sets. And before creating the data sets, let's take a look at the naming convention that Microsoft suggests. Sorry, I should have opened that in a new window. So let's maybe see. So it's very important that you follow the naming convention suggested by Microsoft. We all have a tendency of giving, the names, or we have a tendency of choosing names based on our preferences, but we should avoid that. So if there is a naming convention that is being followed inside your project, just stick to that. Otherwise, you can use this link, which is there on the MSDN documents, for following the correct naming convention. So let's see whether we have something for ADF. So for ADF, you can see here that Microsoft suggests that you should choose a name which would have ADF as the prefix, then hyphen, then maybe the app name or the project name, and then the environment. There is one more, naming convention, which is only, applicable for ADF, and that could be useful as well. So this is the link, you can refer to that. So here, if you see that for link service, so for link service, you should follow these naming conventions. These are just the recommendations. You can always, improve upon it, but it would be good if you try to maintain the consistency. So we would not want to design or write a code where, uh, we seem like beginners or rookies. So let's see whether we can. I think they have only given the naming conventions. Oh, no, sorry, they have the naming convention data set as well. So we'll be using Azure Blob Storage. Uh, in fact, we'll be using the Azure Data Lake Store. So we'll be using DS ADLS, and then we would be using Azure SQL DB. So we'll be naming it something as DSA SQL underscore. So with that in mind, let's create the dataset first. So first would be ADLS. So we're using Gen 2. And in this case, we want the delimited text. So we'll select that. So we have already spinned up the link service. I think it should come up. I would have thought the link service to be there. Let's see whether we have the link services already, provisioned or not. Okay, so right. So I think you might have understood what has happened here. So this is just a case of, reading the files, and we don't really need the features of the Azure Data Lake Gen 2, the advanced features of Azure Data Lake Gen 2. So we just need the files, so we could leverage the Azure blob storage as well. So let's create the data set. And what is the naming convention for blob storage? We can probably copy this and continue. It should be a delimited text. Click on continue. And we could give it a name like, I think, Would give it a name of YouTube demo. And then you have the link service here. So select that. Now this will be parameterized. Click on OK. So here we can create a new parameter. We can say source file name and give some random value. Okay, so this is done. And you can also notice over here that this ADF account is currently linked to Git, which is GitHub, and we are pushing everything into the master branch. So we can click on Save All. Now let's create a data set for our target, which is Azure SQL DB. So this is the one. Click on Continue. For Azure SQL DB, this is the naming convention that we should be following. Now let's go back to here. And we can say YT YouTube demo. Here we've already provisioned the link service, or we have created the link service, so we'll be using that. Go on OK. Here also we would be needing a parameter. So let's say target name, and let's give some random value table1. So here I think we can save it. So only thing that we missed in the case of source dataset is that we did not make it parameterized. So we have done that. So let's see how we can create. We can make the target dataset also as parameterized. You can see this is how it is done. Now let's save this. Now let's go back to the scenario. So you will have files. So first you have to iterate. Let's use the other Excel, other sheet. So there are two things you have to do. First of all, you have to iterate through the files. For this, we would need a for each activity. And then you need to read columns for each file. For this, you would need a lookup activity. And also, you need to read the files, right? Only then you will be able to decide what would be the not the frequency, how many times the iteration should happen. So for that, you would need one more lookup activity. So the first lookup activity would point to the file mapping table. The second lookup activity would point to the column mapping table. So with this in mind, let's now spin up an ADF pipeline or create an ADF pipeline. So we will do one thing. Let me just close this. We will create an ADF pipeline now. And again, let's try to follow the naming convention. So what is the naming convention for pipelines? Okay, I think this is for linked service and dataset. For pipeline, I think we have already read the naming convention, so it should be ADF, your project name. Let's say YouTube demo. Maybe this is small for you guys. And then it shouldn't be underscore, it should be hyphen if that is the right name for it. And then it is dev. Okay. Now first we would need a lookup activity. So let's get the lookup activity here. And maybe we can give it a proper name. That would make more sense. Read the files. And then source data set. So you need to make a connection to the Azure SQL DB. So for that, you can use existing one. We will use Azure SQL dataset. Maybe some other one. I think really doesn't matter as long as you have the dataset supplied. And we'll be reading a table isolation level. So we will keep all the other properties to default. So the table in this case is file mapping. We can say select star from file mapping. I hope this will work. Now we would need a for each activity. So let's connect these two. And let's see for each file. Go to settings. I don't think we need to run it in sequential manner. We can, set it to parallel because that would make the process faster. So you should do some diligence. You should give some, thought into uh, what are you doing, what kind of workloads are you working on. If it is if it needs to be sequential, then set it to sequential. Otherwise, keep it as parallel. Now let's this value. Okay. So what we have done is first we have tried to query the file mapping table, and based on the output that is being returned, we want this for each activity to run, and that's why we have provided this property. Read the files. Read the files is nothing but your lookup activity name, then output, and then value. Okay, so let's now go inside it. Now again, we would need one lookup activity. If you refer to the analysis that we did, so you need a lookup first, then you need for each, and then you need the lookup activity to read the columns, the active columns. So again, let's drag this one. Read the columns. Again, we could use any data set which is set to, which is set to, or which is pointing to the Azure SQL DB. We'll be using a query. So before we do that, I think I just remembered we do not need to query uh, the table. Yeah, we would need to query this columns mapping table, but we would need somehow uh, to create a dynamic mapping. So how that happens so first of all, we would need a copy data activity in order to move the data. But in copy data activity, you have the option of either select the explicit mapping, uh, select the mapping, or you have the option of letting ADF do its own mapping based on the column names, both from the source file and the target table name, target table perspective. But if you allow that to happen, you will not be doing a dynamic mapping. So for example, if you're doing explicit mapping, you have to select these columns one by for every iteration, which is not what we want. We want the mapping to happen dynamically. So for example, if you take this case, you will have to map these columns. Only then you will be able to do the data transfer. And not only this, so this may be for file one. For file two, what if you want to include column 6 as well? Then you have to uh, use two copy data activities in order to do your job. But that is not what we want. We want to do it dynamically. Sorry guys, I think there was some technical glitches, so we are back again. So uh, we now want to do dynamic mapping, and for that, this ADLS or ADF, especially the copy data activity, does mapping under the hood. So for that, we need to go to the code. So what we have done is we are trying to refer to some of the existing pipelines where we are doing the explicit mapping. For example, this one, if you see here, we are doing the explicit mapping. We have specified this mapping. So let's see how the code looks like. So you see here, this is all adjacent code. So you see here, this mapping. In fact, let's look at from the pipeline perspective. So you see here that you have this translator and type and mappings. So basically, we want this piece of code to be generated dynamically because we want to pick up the columns, the source columns as well as the sync columns dynamically. And that is why we want to generate this dynamically. So this is the key here. Now, how would we do it? So for that, we are using, and this is how the store procedure looks like. So this is the store procedure. This is how it looks like. We've already designed the store procedure. And this store procedure is in fact referring to the columns mapping table. And you can see this, it will only pick up those columns where is active is equal to 1. And not only that, it will have source file name as one of the input parameters. So for movies DB1, it will pick up the columns and spit out the the JSON code needed to get our job done. So let's first try to run this. I hope I'm trying to, I hope I'm making sense here, because if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. So let's see how this works. See this is what we want. We want it to spit out the JSON dynamically by using the column mappings table. So this is how it would look like. So you can see here there is no RottonTomato column here. You could also enhance this and add the data type, but just for simplicity, we have not considered the data type here. So what would you do in case of adding the data type is, if you want to add in the data type, you can just add the data type uh, here. You can specify the source column data type as well as the target column data type. It has two additional columns, but we have not done that. So what we want to do is we want to call the store procedure, and that will supply value to our copy data activity. So let's go back to the ADF, cancel this out, and we will go to the pipeline that we were working on. So in this one, we want it to be a store procedure. And which store procedure? This one. Why is it not coming up? Maybe if we search without schema, might come up. Let's wait for a while. Yeah, I think there might be some issues. That's why it's not coming up. But let's click on edit and supply the name of the store procedure. So we need to supply the parameter name as well. So it is taking time. In the meantime, what we should test is we will test if our linked service is working fine. Now for to Azure SQL DB. So this is the linked service. Let's try to test the connection. This is working fine. We will return to our pipeline. Okay. Let's try again. Okay. I think it has got crowded. So we have imported the parameter. So basically what you do is you supply the name of the store procedure, and it will try to check what parameters are expected as part of the procedure run. So in this case, I think we have supplied file name as the input parameter. So that's why it has picked up file name. So from where the file name will come from our lookup activity, item dot. So here, if you see, should be source file name. Click on OK. Now this will run the store procedure. Now let's drag a copy data activity because that is the key here. Without that, you will not be able to do the transfer. So this is copy data activity is an activity which does the batch movement. So if you want a row by row approach, you will you have to use uh, the data flow, which could be expensive. But for this particular demo, we are using copy data activity. So, I mean, I think let's keep the same name as copy data. Let's remove one here. Source will be your ADLS or blob storage account. So this is the account. So the source file name should be same. Current item dot. I think this is already in the memory, so we can paste it. Click on OK. Sync should be the Azure SQL database in the table. So here again, we can fetch the information from this table, which is nothing but target table name. Click on OK. And here comes the very important part. So now the mapping should be dynamic. And for that reason, we have to use this add dynamic content. And this dynamic content will be supplied when you run the store procedure, which is there in the lookup operator or lookup activity. I mean, which will be performed. The run of the store procedure will be performed by the lookup activity. So let's see where the lookup activity is. This is the lookup activity output dot. So this is how the syntax looks like. So if we want to read the output of a store procedure or a query which returns only a single row, then you have to use first row property, and then you supply the name of the column which is being returned. So in this case, if you run this, it is column mapping. So you have to be careful with the cases here because this is case sensitive. So we'll supply column mapping here. Click on OK. And now let's save our work. One thing that I wanted to check here is that in the source data set, even though we have made it parameterized, we might not have given the correct path or the full path. So let's see, where it is. So I think we need to supply the container name here, because otherwise the file name will be picked up from this table, which is moviesdb1.csv and moviesdb2.csv. But how would it know under which container it is? So for that, we will go to the container. So the container here is first container. And then I think it is inside test. Let's copy this. Let's copy this back to our pipeline. And then there is a test folder. Let's see whether this works. First container, test folder. Okay. So yeah, you could have done in that way as well. You could have browsed, or we could have browsed to the container and to the folder, and then that way we would have made sure that it is the right path. So now let's save it. First of all, now let's see whether we have the data in those two tables or not. So, which is our target tables. So let's query this table. We have the data. Query the second table. We have the data. So let's first truncate these. Truncate. So it would be movies DB1 and movies DB2. Again, truncate table movies DB1. Okay. So now if you query these two tables, these will be empty. So when we run the pipeline, first of all, the pipeline run should be successful. And secondly, the values inside the RottonTomato column should be null because we have deactivated the movement of data for that particular column, which is evident from this script. Actually, I think if you just run this, we saw that in the beginning, but let's just confirm it. So it is 0 here, 0 for the second table as well. Okay, so everything is in place. So let's try to debug this. Okay, so it has failed. Let's see what is the error message. I believe there should be brackets after value, but let's see the pipeline that we had created earlier. It is settings, output dot value. Are we using a caps V? Output dot value. Yeah, why is it complaining about that? Okay. So in this case, the first lookup activity is returning multiple rows, so we don't really need this property first row only. So we can disable it, save it now, because ideally we would want the complete result set to be returned, not only the first value. So let's try to debug now. Okay, so we have got a different error this time. Let's see what is the error. Values required property. Okay, let's see what we used here. Item.SourceFileName. Yeah, I thought we had set this up, but no worries, we can add it again. So it should be item dot source file name. Click on OK. Save. Let's go back to the pipeline, debug this. Refresh it. Refresh it again. Okay. So this time that particular activity was successful. Okay, so this time we got an error in the copy data activity. So we are making progress, but let's see. Go back here and let's see what is the error message. Yeah. So I think what we have done is we saw that the file has the header as the first row. So I think that was not marked, and that is why the copy data activity is getting confused. So what we have to do is we have to go to our data set, source data set, and we have to set this property first row as header. So you can see here, this is the practical demo where we have also seen the errors. So it would be useful when you encounter these errors when you are executing or when you are doing the practice. So let's run this again. Refresh it again. I believe this time we might get success, but unfortunately we have hit an error. Okay, seems it is not liking the dynamic column map. Activity. Yeah, I think we have to convert this into JSON. JSON. Only then it will be understood by the copy data activity. Even though this entire thing looks like it is JSON, but we have to convert this explicitly. So click on save. We'll try to run it again. Okay. Cool. So this time, I think the operation was successful, or the movement of the data was successful. So let's query the table. And again, the expectation is that the RottonTomato column will not have any value. See here, for DB2 it does not have a value. For DB1 it does not have a value. So you can see an extra row here. That is because I think in the file you will have one more row at the end, blank row at the end. See this one. So that's why uh, the blank row is coming here. So let's do one more thing now that we have seen that it is working. So now let's try to include or make this column active. So if you do this, so two rows will be affected as you would have expected, because the same column name exists in these two files or tables. And again, let's try to truncate these tables. Go back to our pipeline, debug it again. Now the RottonTomato column should have a value. Refresh it once again. Okay, what happened? Mhm. So what's the actual? I think we might have given an incorrect name. Let's go back to our test. So it is rotten space tomato. And what is there here? Okay, I think that is the error. So you can see here that we have not given a space. So what we would do now is, yeah, let's delete these rows and insert it again. Only for rotten tomato. Delete from mapping where source name is rotten tomato. So this should delete 2 rows. Yep. Now we will give a space here and we want to make it active. Insert. And here as well. Okay. It should work now. That is what I expect. Let's see. You can see here we are encountering different errors as would happen when you are doing the real-time project work. So it's not a smooth sailing always. So with practice, you get to know what kind of error it is, and then you apply the fix, and hopefully it works. You can see it is working now. Let's go to the first table. So the rotten tomato column has the values, and similarly, for second table, it has the values. So this is it, guys. So this was one of the scenarios that you might face. The possibilities is that you would face this in your project work, or you might encounter this during any of your interviews that you decide to take when you are appearing for data engineering interviews. So I hope this was helpful. So if you have any questions, do let us know in the comment box below. And we'll meet in the next video. Till then, take care of yourself. Thank you.